The Nigerian National Committee of the Vienna-based International Press Institute is asking the incoming administration to create a better operating environment for journalists and media organizations. The group requested on the 2023 World Press Freedom Day. Well, IPI Nigeria is also concerned that journalists have not been able to fully utilize the Freedom of Information Act to hold public officials accountable because government officials continue to play pranks to deny them the information they seek. In a joint press release, IPI Nigeria President Muskilu Mojid and Chairman Advocacy Committee of IPI Olutobi Shoniyi state that in the past few years, cases of media and journalist harassment have been rampant, including physical attacks. Therefore, he's urging the incoming government to embrace a new attitude by deliberately improving the working conditions of journalists. All right, sir, let's bring in the president of the Nigeria Union of Journalists, Christopher Isiguzo, and former chairman of the Nigeria Union of Journalists, Lagos Council, Qasim Akinreti. Thank you, both of you gentlemen, for joining us on Newsnight tonight. Let me start with you, Isiguzo. I mean, first off, your assessment of press freedom in the last 1 year since we celebrated the last one. Would you say that Nigeria has made much progress as far as press freedom is concerned, especially when you consider the theme for this year, shaping a future of rights, freedom of expression as a driver of all other human rights?
Well, thank you very much for having me this evening. There is no better way of describing, well, the progress or thereabout that we've made in terms of press freedom. Not just within the year, but in the past 4 years, than to take a very closer look at the Reporters Without Borders that have highlighted the World Press Freedom Index. You know, I recall that in 2020, we scored 125 out of 180 countries that were assessed. And in 2021, we made an improvement and scored 120 out of 180. And in 2022, it became 129. Then in 2023, this year, we have scored 123. You can see that we make 2 steps forward. The next year, we make 5 steps backwards. And that, to a very large extent, captures the true situation, you know, with press freedom. For this year alone, we have already recorded, this is just May, in the first quarter of 2023, we've recorded about 45 confirmed cases of attack, you know, on journalists. And of course, we've also recorded about 24 instances of fines from the regulator. When you put all this together, you can see that press freedom is suffering a shipwreck, you know, in our system, and that's not too good. And if we also look at the legal frameworks, we have existing laws that don't seem to encourage, you know, press freedom in our climate. For instance, you look at the Constitution, Section 22. Chapter 2 or so, which of course repose the responsibility of holding government accountable in the media. When you talk about accountability, you talk about transparency in governance, you talk about the sum total of good governance. That is the assignment that has been given to the media. But sadly, that section of the Constitution is not justiciable. So it becomes a challenge. It's akin to sending somebody to go catch a lion with bare hands. There is no protection for journalists in any existing law in the country. Beyond the Constitution, you also look at the Cybercrime Prohibition Act, of 2015. When you go through it, you will be wondering how journalists still walk the streets and they are free. So
okay.
some of these
all right. Okay, let me come in here and bring in Dr. Akinreti. And Dr. Akinreti, good to see you. And quickly listening to that news, asking the coming administration to weigh in and see that we journalists have a better environment to operate. What makes, you all, I'm talking about the journalists who converged, to think that there will be any different approach by the coming administration?
Thank you very much. We're looking forward to a more robust engagement with the new government, going by the fact that you look at the media space today, the media space is free. There are more entrants into the media. And of course, the media has also, tried to absorb, aside from new entrants, although young and bubbling journalists who can ply their trade, within the ecosystem. But what we are looking for is if there are going to be a lot of improvement in terms of access to information, because this is extremely critical. And if you have access to information, also the condition in which journalists work in media houses is also another very, very important thing. Because today, media is not just a social responsibility, media is also business. And how we can also ensure that media organizations are able to thrive well within the environment that we find ourselves, because the economic situation is extremely stifling. And so most of media houses could not also provide adequate could provide it effectively for the welfare of journalists. And knowing fully well that we have, importantly, a very thorough Democrat in the president-elect, Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu, who has demonstrated his love for the media in Lagos when he was a governor, and all the while his successor have been extremely very, quite humble and very fair to journalists in Lagos. I can attest to that. It's on record that the government of Akim Ambode, took the bull by the horn to provide, access fund to the union when I was the chairman. It's 25 million naira for us to start, a secretarial project. And so other training programs that the government was also, assist journalists to carry out in Lagos. And bear in mind that one way or the other, the president-elect has had a very, very robust relationship with the media. It did not only cut the media, it's also part of the, the media establishment, one way or the other. And so we are extremely ecstatic that that there will be a new lease of life, or that is presidency. And we also look at areas like, collaboration between government regulators and the ombudsman. The Nigerian Press Organization has established an ombudsman now. Okay.
Before we come to Isiguzo, quickly here, let's not confuse, some kind of provision of amenities or welfare to journalists with what the body of journalists are asking, talking about access to information.
Freedom of Information
yes,
Act.
And of course also allowing journalists the freedom to carry out their responsibilities. Now, speaking of freedom. Now, speak to us pretty well, if you will. Does that really exist? We've actually seen pictures, footages, even while you were chairman of the body of journalists in Lagos, how some journalists have been brutalized in the course of carrying out their tasks.
The engagement of the media with government agencies is extremely important, because the agency seems to understand the nature of our job. Two things are very critical to our job. What we do is for the good of the people, for public interest. And government is of the opinion that when you are going to serve public good and public interest, there are, what we can call a line of demarcation with, state security services. Because it doesn't seem to, the law enforcement agencies believe that, that if you want to make good for the people, you are also going to obstruct their own activities. A good example is the nature of attacks that we have on journalists. These attacks are not only from the law enforcement agencies, it's also from the society. And when you have the unknown gunmen attacking journalists, when you have political thugs attacking journalists, when you also have a society that does not appreciate the work of a journalist, so it's not only about governments. So we don't need to get this is clearer. I know that, yeah, the space is quite open, but if the space is open and you can't practice your trade very well, that seems to be a challenge. So for me, that's what I said, in Lagos, what we try to do is to have a reapproachment, to let the security agencies understand the role of the media, the role of journalists. So once we understand this, then we could be able to work together to ensure that the Nigerian press or the media has unfettered access to information. You have access to information so that you can engender public good and public interest.
Great points there. Chris, I mean, the European Union harps on the importance of the media to democracy. In our environment, in Nigeria, especially looking at the transition period, of course, to May 29 and hopefully beyond that, how more so now for Nigeria should the role of the media be strongly emphasized?
Well, it's very important. The role of the media, we don't really need to overemphasize it because it's very, very, clear. And my colleague has raised a number of issues. Mm-hmm. But very importantly, as we work towards May 29th, there are critical ingredients, features of democratic governance. There's a particular newspaper in London, the motto says, democracy dies in darkness. If you are not going to allow the people to freely express themselves, then democracy takes flight. Democracy is strictly anchored on freedom of expression, on media freedom. That is the theme, basically, of this year's World Press Freedom Day. Now, we are talking about access to information. Recall sometime last year or thereabout, there was move by the National Assembly, especially House of Representatives, to come up with some amendments to the Nigerian Press Council Act, and of course that of the National Broadcasting Commission. But the stakeholders came together and felt that the job of regulating the media space should not be left for government. And that's why at the level of Nigerian Press Organization, the Nigerian Union of Journalists, the Guild of Editors, the NPAN, and of course other stakeholders, we have come up with what we term co-regulation. And that's what gave birth to the National Media Complaints Commission, the National Ombudsman, which has brought the NBA, the journalists, the civil society organizations, the government together to be able to regulate activities of the media. Now, what are we looking at the incoming administration? Now we have put the National Ombudsman out. We also expect a robust relationship, working understanding with the media and of course the incoming administration. Now we're also looking at reviewing some of the existing legal frameworks that tend to undermine press freedom. Because I made reference to the Cybercrime Prohibition Act.
Right.
It's there. You have the criminal code, you have laws on libel and the rest of them. We really need to revisit these existing laws and see how we can tinker with them so that they can, align with the spirit and letters of press freedom. That's what we're looking at. As we speak today, like I said earlier on, there is no existing law that protects journalists anywhere in Nigeria. So we also expect that the incoming administration is going to also work closely with media stakeholders so that we can come up with something that will be able to equally protect the journalists. It's not just about asking them to hold government to account, but they also need some level of protection as they go about their practice.
And let's see if we can get a final one from you, Dr. Akinreti. Looking at the 10th National Assembly, speaking of which some of the key concerns of Chris Isiguzo, how best can we have a law that will ultimately protect journalists in Nigeria?
Yes, I agree with that, that we need more protection for journalists because once a journalist is well protected, yeah, he would also do his best in trying to inform, educate, and entertain the Nigerians and the society at large. One other area which I want us to look into is the issue of disinformation, hate speech, and of course fake news, and how we can curb the activities of those who obviously are not professionals, but because they have access, to media instruments, they also pose as journalists. It's also important that we also look inward to ourselves. If we are asking government to do this for us, we also need to own up to ourselves to see how well we can promote the industry assiduously. So I want government to have new reapproachments to the media, to the practitioners, in terms of ensuring that whatever will make media to thrive very well is very, very important.
Quickly, Isiguzo, before we let you go, I mean, social media, largely unfettered. Where do you draw the line, really? Very quickly.
Well, is a reality that we are living with now. We cannot do away with that because the social media, the new media, clearly they have come to stay with us. All we need to do is to find a way to also rein them in, especially the operators of the social media or the new media, when we bring them on board. That's why what we have just done, we have brought the Guild of Corporate Online Publishers on board, and we also intend to bring other bodies that operate within the new media structure. So that, because if you don't bring them under your authority, you'll not be able to control their activities, But however we look at it, one sure way of also checking some of the issue around fake news, disinformation, and what have you. Those that operate within the traditional media structure must also invade the social media, the new media, so that by the time they try to churn out what you consider as fake news, you will be there to counter it with the real news, well-verified news, authentic news that represents the truth. Because if you continue to shy away, they'll continue to have a field day in their own activities.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Chris Isiguzo is the NUJ President, Nigeria Union of Journalists, and Qasim Akinreti, former chairman of the NUJ. Thank you, both of you gentlemen, for joining us on this World Press Freedom Day.